Hello, friends. This is your friend, Kenzie Dodds, and I'm excited to be joined by my friend, Michael Jackson. Say hi, Michael.
Hey, Kent, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Super excited to be here.
Oh, I'm glad that you're excited. I'm disappointed that you said, hey, Kent. I asked you to say hi, Michael, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry.
Gotcha. Start over.
Rewind.
Yeah. So Michael and I have been friends for I think the first time we met in person was probably at a conference. I think React Rally. Is that right?
Yeah, it must have been.
You know what? Maybe it was React Conf.
I remember the place. We were in a hotel. It was React Conf. It was React Conf 2016. Because I remember we were in the Marriott Hotel in San Francisco. The first year in 2015, they had it at the Facebook campus, but in 2016, they did it at this hotel downtown San Francisco. And I remember meeting you there. So,
Yeah.
do you remember that?
So early days. Yes, I do. I do remember that. And
Yeah.
that was actually when I was doing JavaScript Air, and I did a live show at React Conf. That was fun.
And I was like, Kent, I was like, you need to tell people that you like React. And you, I remember you were like, okay, I like React. I was like, say it louder, Kent.
Yeah. And I was like, I'll tweet it. And I tweeted it. Somebody could go find that tweet.
For sure. That'd be hilarious.
So yeah, it's been a long time, and it's just been a pleasure to get to know you over the years, and
Thanks, man. Same.
run into you at conferences and stuff. Looking forward to doing that again as COVID runs away.
Oh my gosh, I'm so looking forward to getting back to in-person stuff. It'll be so nice.
Yeah, for real. But I'd actually love to if you could give a little intro to yourself. You can be as personal or professional as you want, and take as much time as you like. We just want to get to know you a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Michael. You can find me online. I tried to snag the M Jackson Twitter handle, or handle anywhere I can. So that's me on Twitter, and I'm M Jackson on GitHub, and those are probably the only two places you really care about. But I've been writing JavaScript for a long time now. I think I wrote my first line of code back in like 2007 was when I was getting started with it.
Ooh, I graduated from high school that year.
Nice. So yeah, I was in college at the time, working and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and so I took a programming class and really enjoyed it, and so that's how I kind of got into programming. I was at BYU at the time, actually. Yeah, and all the best paid jobs on campus were programmer jobs. So, the people who were doing, like there were lots of different jobs. You could be like a janitor, do landscaping, or be like a TA or something. But the programmers got paid $12 an hour. Whoa. So yeah, exactly. So I was like, I'll do that. So I applied to 3 different programming jobs, and I didn't actually know how to program, and I got one of them. And so I was like, all right, I'll go and figure this out. So anyway, that was kind of my origin story there, learning how to program.
Wow, that's awesome.
So a couple of other things about me. Married with 4 kids, have 2 boys, 2 girls. The oldest is 14 and the youngest is 6. So we have a full house, and I live in Southern California, kind of close to San Diego. So if you're down here, hit me up. Would love to go and grab a burger or something sometime. But yeah, that's me. And okay, so a couple of things I built probably.
Oh yeah,
say that as well. So I built React Router. Is one of the biggest things I've built together with my business partner Ryan Florence. We've been working on that thing since React came out, since about 2014, late 2014.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I think we're still working on it, but I've never been more excited about it. Like, we've got some killer stuff coming in V6 that I think is just people are really gonna like it. It's gonna really make it a lot easier to build really cool stuff in your apps. We're gonna have a story for how you do data in React Router, both reads and mutations.
Yeah.
We're also going to have a story for um, doing everything relative. And the beta is out now. It's been out for a while. It's stalled a little bit because COVID kind of um, uh, took a huge chunk out of our business. So we had to focus on like actual revenue generating opportunities last year, and weren't able to dedicate as much time to open source. But it's been out there and it's been stable, and a lot of people are actually using it in production already, the V6 beta. But
I am using it for quite a few things.
I mean, we're building Remix on it, so we're building our current software on it. So yeah, it's a cool project. So that's one thing that I built. And then I also built this thing called Unpackage, which Kent has also blogged about. Thank you, Kent.
Yep.
But Unpackage is it was just kind of like a little burst of inspiration where I was like, there are a bunch of files on npm. What if all of those files had a URL? And that was it. That was my whole. That was the whole idea. That was the whole thing. And so that's Unpackage, and Unpackage is a CDN basically for all the files on npm, and that thing does quite a bit of traffic now these days too.
I started using that back when I was still doing AngularJS and using it for my Angular Formly demos and stuff. That was transformative for me. I loved that.
Nice. Yeah, there was, I think you were one of the first users. John Lindquist, I think, was using it as well. I remember actually he took it down one day. I was like, John, what are you doing? Like, he was like, oh, sorry. I was like, that was the day where I was like, well, it should probably have a real CDN in front of it. So I went and put Cloudflare in front of it so that somebody couldn't take down my origin server. And Cloudflare has been amazing to work with. They've given me a free enterprise account to work with. And now last month we did a petabyte of data.
That's just outrageous of JavaScript files.
It's crazy. Well, I think a lot of people too are using it for like images and icons, CSS. I mean, people are publishing all kinds of stuff to npm these days. So yeah, it's grown quite a bit, and it's pretty cool. It's useful. I use it. I still use it. I think probably the most useful thing for me is when I want to know what is in a package.
Yes.
I go and I just add a slash to the URL, and then I can go and see everything that's in a certain version of a package. But yeah, so that's me. Those are some of the things that I built. And then obviously my latest project, well, not obviously necessarily, but my latest project is called Remix, which I'm also working on with Ryan. And Kent has thank you, Kent. You've been awesome, like tweeting about it and just telling people about it. But yeah, it's basically it's like React Router plus, if you can imagine that, right? Yeah. It's like React Router, like all the things that we always wanted to do with React Router, because we know that it's such a cool little piece of software. It's this cool little core, and you can do such amazing things with it. And we want to help you do even more with it. So, how do you server render a React Router app, and how do you fetch data with it and take care of mutations and load your styles and, do transitions and all that sorts of stuff. So it's all, so that's what Remix is it's like React Router taken to the next level.
Yeah, it really is. That's awesome. One thing about your origin story that I was curious about, what year did you graduate from BYU?
2008.
Okay, yeah, sweet. Mm-hmm. So like I said, I graduated from high school in 2007, but I went to my first semester of BYU in the fall of 2007. So we overlapped by a semester. Then I went on my mission after that. But yeah, we were
there for the same year. Yeah, my last year was your first year there. Crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Huh.
Good times.
But where were you? What were you studying?
I was.
Well, that year you were just doing generals.
Yeah, that year
probably.
I was mostly doing generals. I did CS 142 and 120 or something like that, like intro to computer programming.
142, stuff. Yeah. That was a tough class.
Yeah.
For 100 level class, that's a tough class.
It was a little tricky. And then the computer systems was harder. I can't remember what number that was, but that was in the engineering school. And we started with programming in zeros and ones.
Ooh.
Like we learned about transistors.
Is that your degree? Is computer engineering?
No. So I was going for electrical engineering, and then when I got back from my mission, it was like I'm not very good at math, and I don't.
Everything changes. Yeah.
bounced around, eventually graduated in information systems, but yeah, good times.
Oh, I graduated in information systems.
Oh, nice, nice. You were
Yeah,
one of the earlier classes.
yeah,
So you're,
we probably had some of the same instructors and
oh
stuff.
my goodness, that's awesome.
Yeah, I was
Like,
there with Lindstrom and
uh-huh.
Albrecht and
Yeah, no
golly, I can't
way.
even remember some of those other people.
I can't
Yeah.
believe we haven't made this connection already.
Same program, same school, like what, like 3 years apart? You probably graduated what, like
I
2010 or 2011?
2014
Oh,
actually,
14.
so
Okay.
that's a
Yeah.
ways after you. But
Yeah.
yeah, did you get the
Crazy.
master's?
They were like, if you stay one more year, you can get your master's. And I was like, I can't do any more school. I'm sorry. I need to get out of here.
I,
I probably should have, but I
you
was
know,
short sighted.
my
I just had to
master's
get out.
degree hasn't done me a whole lot of good. So
Well,
I think
you can make a little like name tag and call yourself Master Dogs,
that's true, which I think is better than doctor. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's better than Bachelor,
yeah, yeah,
Bachelor Jackson. Nah, that
yeah.
doesn't sound that great.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so the thing that you're working on now, and I already talked with Ryan. So anybody who's listening to this and hasn't already listened to Ryan's side of this, make sure you give that a listen. But in this chat with you, I wanted to dive deep into what Remix is and what makes it special, beyond just that it's based on the fundamentals and foundations of the web and that sort of thing. So um, just to kind of frame this conversation, I just today published a blog post titled "Don't Solve Problems, Eliminate Them," and I gave a couple of examples of different things like in real life of companies that eliminate problems and people who create problems for themselves and different things like that. And Remix was an example of a software that eliminates a bunch of problems. But I also acknowledge that when you eliminate problems, you typically are taking just a different approach and you accept trade-offs. And so you're creating new problems, and hopefully solving those problems is cheaper, easier, and better than solving the problems that you had before that you had eliminated. So anyway, yeah, I'd just love to talk with you about some of the problems that you feel like Remix eliminates and what trade-offs you're making in the process. So yeah, with all of that said, what do you think makes Remix so special? What's special about Remix to you?
Absolutely. I first of all just kind of want to speak a little bit to the principle that you're talking about, which is that, certain solutions or certain things like, you could even have an entire system or an entire library that when you take a different approach, you just don't really have the need for that system anymore, or that library or whatever. I think one of the most amazing examples that I ever saw of this in my programming career was when I was at Twitter I was a software developer at Twitter in 2011, 2012. And it was just around the same time that Instagram was really taking off. Instagram started a little earlier than that, but it was about the time they were really taking off. And I knew some of the engineers that were at Instagram at the time very early on. And I had actually interviewed there, and they were really, really smart people, and we had a lot of smart people at Twitter too. But we took two very different approaches to solving this fundamental problem, and the problem was generating IDs. And you think about it, like it's not a problem that you typically have. If you need to generate IDs, maybe you've got a MySQL database, you have an auto incrementing column that's the ID column. And as you insert new records, MySQL generates an ID for you. And then when you get them back out, now you've got your ID. Done, right? Yeah, not a problem for most businesses. But at the scale that both of these companies were at, Twitter and Instagram, it was a real problem to generate unique IDs as quickly as they needed them, because they needed, on the order of millions every second. They needed these IDs because just from the sheer volume of traffic that they were doing. And so,
and we're not just talking like a single tweet or a single image, but like so many aspects of the data that's in those things need to have a unique ID as well.
Yeah. Your users, your tweets, your posts, your videos, your likes, whatever things, everything's got an ID attached to it. Right. And I remember reading a blog post, and it's still up on the Instagram engineering blog, where they talk about how they solve this problem for Instagram. They basically took their Postgres database, they sharded it into 256 shards, and then they ran a little script on each of them that was written in this, it's this procedural language that goes in the Postgres database. It's called like PGPL QL or something. It's got this weird name. I forget what it's called, but anyway, they wrote this tiny little script, and it basically, on insert into that database, it would take, the current timestamp and the shard ID, and then I think like an integer that was, they could generate 1,000 of them per second. So like an auto or a counter like per second. So they actually had the ability, across 256 shards to generate, hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions, I forget the exact numbers, of IDs, per second. And they just used this thing that was built into the database because they had a very small team. And then contrast that. And so I was working at Twitter at the time, and I contrasted that with what we were doing at that time. And I don't know if they still do it, but Twitter actually had a completely separate service, a triple redundant service for generating IDs. And it's basically just a server that sits there, and you can ask it for IDs. And obviously, if it ever goes down, the whole system is hosed. So they made it, they had another server that was automatically take over in case that one failed. And then they had another one that would automatically take over in case the first two failed, because
double redundancy. Yeah.
Well, because if you have something like that, and literally the whole system relies on it, right? You can't tweet, you can't sign up, you can't do anything unless you can get an ID so you can create that record and put it in your database. And so they had to back this thing up, and it was called Snowflake. And so, that was one solution to the ID generation problem, and you probably had, a team that has to like manage these servers and look after them over this time. And this other solution from Instagram just seems so much more, just so much more elegant to me, right? To embed this little script in the database, shard it across 256 nodes. And now we've got like we don't even have the need for that ID generation system. That whole system is just superfluous to us because we took a different approach, right? And it's been something that I've been fascinated with my entire career, is this idea about how when you hit on the right abstraction, when you get the right approach, other things just kind of melt away. And I think you see this too in your code, right? If you ever get to the point where you get to delete a bunch of code for some reason, it's an amazing feeling, right? Because you found some other kind of approach. And lots of times it happens when you find something better, you find a better abstraction, and you get to delete a bunch of code. So one of the things that I really love about what we're doing with Remix is we're just building it on web standards, right? So I feel like there is a lot of stuff that we have built in the current generation of web frameworks, abstractions and things that we've built, data layers and client-side caches and things that we've built, where the browser actually has a really good primitive already for that solution. I'll give you one example. So one example is a data cache, right? A client-side data cache. We actually thought in the very first prototypes of Remix, we thought, well, we don't want to make unnecessary fetches to the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a client-side data cache, and it'll just be this little hash, and it'll just live there in memory, and it will key it by location. So as you're navigating around the locations, if you've used React Router, they have this little key property on them, and it's just a unique ID that just lets you know where you are. And we'll just key it by that. And then if you hit the back button or the forward button, we won't have to go and refetch from the server the data because we'll already have it here in our cache. And you've seen this play out on a regular old server rendered site 100 times, right? If you're browsing around and then you click the back button, the browser is able to restore, a lot of things. Like it'll restore the page and the data, and in lots of cases, it'll even restore the scroll position if you were scrolled halfway down the page when you navigated out. So it's able to give you this really, really quick back button experience, right? And building a client-side router like React Router, we wanted to give you that exact same experience. When you hit the back button, it's just like, if you're doing a client-side navigation, it's supposed to work just like a server-side navigation.
Mm.
You're going to go back to the last page. You're going to have the exact same data there, the exact same scroll position. So anyway, this client-side data cache, this was part of our strategy for making that happen. We're going to cache all the data client-side, and we hadn't figured out like how to purge the stale data, because now anytime you have a cache, right, now you've got to figure out, well, how do we expunge or purge stuff out of the cache? So anyway, so we were taking this approach, and then and then at one point it kind of hit us. We're like, wait, so when you make a request to a server from a browser, in the HTTP response, you can put caching headers, right? And this is essentially how you tell the browser, hey, you can hang on to this response for X amount of time. So you can hang on to this response for a minute or 5 minutes or an hour or a day or forever. And this is something that we typically rely on quite heavily for things like static assets. So when you go and deploy, you generate, hashed CSS and JS files, and then you tell the server, just, send cache headers that'll cache this forever, because the next time I deploy, the hash is going to change. And so I don't want them to ever have to re-download this file. And we figured, so we can use that exact same thing for our client-side data cache, right? We don't need to keep a hash in memory. We can just say, look, in your data loader, you send back some caching headers. The browser is going to see that. And if we ever make a fetch to that URL ever again, the browser is going to not make the fetch to your server, because we're going to say, oh, go and fetch the data. And it's going to say, well, I already got it. Actually, it's still fresh since the last time I fetched it. So I'll just use that, right? So it's not like the browser gives you like a programmatic API into this cache, right? You can't say, hey, go and look up in the cache and see if you have the key or whatever. But you can actually do some things in service workers, right? You have a cache API there, but in the normal browser, you don't. Nevertheless, you are able to take advantage of this cache, right? So
you don't need an API.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need an API. You just make the fetch, and if the browser has it cached, you'll get it back. And so this is an example of one thing that, for us in Remix, for ourselves, an entire thing that we were able to avoid by just using the right abstraction. So how does that play out for Remix users, right? Somebody who's using a Remix app, somebody who's building a Remix app, who's using Remix, if they're just loading data from the server, they don't actually need to have their own client-side data cache, which lets them avoid a bunch of problems, like how do you control the size of the cache, how big it gets, how do you know when to purge stuff out of the cache? This is definitely a problem that you've had to solve if you at any point decided you wanted to cache your data client-side. It's something that we rely on in Remix, and it just comes out of the box. And by the way, because of the nested nature of React Router, we'll actually only fetch the data for the routes that have changed on the page. So, something like GraphQL, right, where you said, okay, I've got this GraphQL query. I want to avoid the overfetching. How do you figure out how to run just the query for just the pieces of the page that have changed? It's all built into React Router. We've got this concept of routes, and your data is tied to your routes. So there are multiple levels to this overfetching problem, but that's at least one level where I think we're able to solve it by just using something that's built into the browser and not inventing our own thing.
Absolutely. Well, and whether you use GraphQL or not, you can use GraphQL with Remix, but because
100%.
you write your data fetching stuff inside of a loader, that runs server side. And so you don't need to worry about overfetching data. You just filter it out in the loader, which is happening server side. And then all that you send back to the client is 100% what the user needs. And so the overfetching problem doesn't exist in Remix. You've eliminated that problem altogether.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So speaking specifically about GraphQL, you absolutely can use GraphQL in your Remix app, right? If you've ever written a GraphQL server, you've probably got I think they call them resolvers.
Mhm.
You've got your resolvers that, when the query comes in, if you need some piece of data, those are the things that are responsible for going out to, your real database, your Postgres or MySQL or whatever, and actually fetching the data so that you can return it in the GraphQL response. We've actually got a similar mechanism in Remix called a loader. And that's where you can do your resolving, right? So you can go and do your fetch, go and query MySQL, go and do even just a HTTP fetch to some other API server, do your sorting, do your data filtering, and then just return the minimum amount of data that the view needs. So you might think like, well, in order to solve this problem of overfetching, we actually need to go and build a GraphQL server. Maybe you don't. Maybe all you needed was a framework that knew how to only first of all only call the loader for the piece of the page that is changed, and then second of all, in that loader, be able to like cache the response and stuff so that when the browser goes to ask for it again, it doesn't have to make the network round trip. So I feel like by hitting on the right abstraction, I feel like a lot of the pieces that you might have thought you needed, maybe you don't need them anymore, and instead you can just sort of use things that you already have that are built into the browser it wasn't impossible to use them before, but it was definitely a little more difficult without some of the tools that we're providing as part of Remix.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Like the problems that these other tools solve, like Apollo, or for the GraphQL for the client side and caching, or maybe Gatsby for static site generation. So you just have to build it once, and then you never worry about building it again for everybody over and over again. And these problems exist. It's not like they just solved problems or that didn't happen. But the issue is that their solution creates a whole host of other new problems, which they are addressing. They're working on those things and making those things better. But if we could take a step back and say, what if I didn't have that problem? Is it possible for me to not have that problem?
Yeah.
And
it's like that ID generation problem that I was talking about, right? Like if you don't, what if we don't have the problem, then we don't have to create an abstraction to try and fix the thing that's not broken.
Exactly. And we have, because the browser has so many things already built in, if you can leverage those things, you have to worry about those things either way. Like if you make your own JavaScript based solution, or if you don't, either way, you have this built-in solution. So you may as well find a way to use it. And Remix has. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about was CSS, because I've been through all of it. Like I started with regular CSS. I did Less, I did Sass, I did Stylus, and then I got into CSS modules, and then I got into CSS and JS. I built a CSS and JS library, and I've done it all, like the CSS prop and like styled components, all of the things. I've done them all, and I've never been so excited about CSS since jumping into Remix.
It's cool, right? Like ask yourself, if you're listening to this podcast right now, and I know it's a little weird to talk to the listeners because I'm supposed to be talking to you, but if you're listening right now, just think, how do you only get the CSS on the page that is necessary for that page? That's a hard problem to solve, right? Like it's and we're not punting on the problem at all, but we are taking a different approach by using nested routes and React Router. So just like the data loaders, where we only call the data loaders that you need for a given page, or as you're transitioning client side between pages, only call the data loaders for the routes that have changed. We do the exact same thing for your CSS. So the CSS for the components that are on the page is the only CSS that is loaded when they're looking at that page. And then if they change one of the nested routes, we only have to load one new CSS file just for that route. So it's again, not something that was impossible to do before, but it's something that in Remix, it just falls out of this, it just falls out of the framework so naturally to do it like this, that I'm starting to look at a lot of the things that we have, been using over the last couple of years and like wondering, is that necessary? Like, do I need to obfuscate all of my, do I need a build tool that's going to obfuscate all of my CSS class names if I'm not even going to have these two CSS files on the page at the same time?
Yeah. The thing that really blew my mind, and maybe for some people this will blow their mind too, is like, and it's so simple, but what Remix does is not only does it get the CSS onto the page for a given route, but when you leave that route, the CSS is unloaded off of the page.
Yeah, it's gone.
The link tag goes away. And JavaScript, if you do that, the JavaScript is already run. It's hanging out in memory. You can remove the script tag. Nothing changes. But with CSS, you remove the link tag, and that CSS is gone. And the browser repaints, and it says, oh, that CSS doesn't apply anymore. And so because of this, and because I've never seen anybody do this before. Remix
it's cool, right? It's so cool, right?
Yeah.
And we can even do things like, when you're doing a client-side navigation, we can actually wait for that style sheet to load, which is, again, another thing that you're going to have to think about unless you want a flash of unstyled content, something that you're going to have to think about, but not, so it's built into the framework in Remix, so you don't have to think about it. But it's just another one of those things. And again, it's not like you could totally do that yourself, but we're just building it on web standards and making it easy for you to build your site on web standards. And you're going to learn a lot about web standards in the process. That's one thing that that I'm very bullish about, that I'm very excited about with Remix is, a lot of the discussions and things that we're having in the Discord channel, we're all learning about this stuff together. We had a conversation just the other day about module preload and script defer and how that all works. And we're determined to take all of the best that the web has to give us and make it really, really super easy for you to take advantage of. And you're going to learn a lot in the process. So that's probably one of the things I'm most excited about. It's just, just myself, and for everybody who uses Remix, I just want to cultivate a really nice community where we're all just learning together and building really cool stuff together in the process.
Yeah. Well, and basing things on web standards also, not only does it mean that I'm spending tons of time on MDN instead of Remix docs, which I think is a really nice, that means that my skills are transferable. Like
Totally.
I'm learning this stuff. And this is actually one of the things I loved about React was I was coming from AngularJS, and I spent so much time digging through AngularJS specific stuff. And when I moved over to React, I couldn't carry very much of that with me. But with React, the better I get at JavaScript, the better I get at React, and vice versa. And I feel like Remix makes me a better website builder by accident. Like I'm building websites with Remix, and then if I'm going to do something outside of Remix, I'm better at doing that just because I learned the web platform with Remix.
Yeah. You're learning about things like HTTP headers. You're learning about HTML. You're learning about forms and data mutations and post and put and get and link tags and loading style sheets and things like that. We're not teaching you, here's the Remix templating language, here's the, that's garbage. That's not a web standard.
Right. To be clear, Michael, one thing that you didn't say earlier in your intro was that you created Mustache. So when you talk about garbage templating languages, you're like the grandfather of
I'm guilty,
templates.
100%. So I was actually working at Twitter at the time, and all of Twitter was done using Mustache. And, but it was just slow. And so they were like, how can we make this faster? And it didn't occur to me to say, just use JavaScript, right? That's what the smart people at Facebook were doing at the time. I was like, let's rewrite Mustache. So I went into the Mustache.js project and got commit rights from Jan, who's an awesome guy. Thank you, Jan. But anyway, and I put like a parser and a tokenizer and everything. And I rewrote Mustache.js, and I was like, okay, it's so much faster now. Okay, it's so much faster for our product. And then people would come to me and they would say something like, those little curly braces that you have, like, can I add 2 numbers inside there? Can I, if I have a string, can I call 2.2 uppercase on that string inside the curly braces? And if you're familiar with Mustache, you'll be familiar with the curly braces. That's what the mustaches were. And I remember thinking no, you can't do any of that stuff. This isn't real JavaScript. This is just some silly templating language. And I am now literally writing my own language. I have
Yeah.
conditionals and I have for loops. And we had all this documentation about it and stuff. And then when I found the React docs, I was like, these don't say anything about their special templating language, their special syntax for a for loop or for an if statement. Like there is nothing about their own secret templating language in these docs. It is literally just, oh, if you need a loop over something, use a map. Or if you need a conditional, use a ternary or something like that. And so it's just JavaScript, right? And that's, I think really, I think you really nailed it. That's the spirit of React, is just use JavaScript. And I would say the spirit of Remix is just use the web. And in the process of using Remix, you are going to learn more about the web, and you're going to become more proficient at these things that, in your next job, in your next whatever, they're totally transferable. You're going to know a lot more about HTTP and HTML and some of the things that the browser gives you. We're not trying to teach you Remix specific stuff.
Yeah. Well, and even then though, I don't know why I'd want to transfer my skills to anything else, because I enjoy Remix too much.
Awesome. Yeah, man, it's fun. I'm having a blast with it. So
it just makes me really productive. It's a very productive framework.
Cool. That's the spirit that we're trying to capture. I've been doing this for a while, and I'll never forget, one of my favorite frameworks for back in the day was a framework called Code Igniter. And it was literally just, that's how you felt when you used it. And I think all of us who are in development for a while, hopefully you had that experience when you first got in, and before things got really complicated, you used something that really captivated your attention and was very expressive. You were able to take your ideas and make something very quickly. Hopefully you got that chance. I know for a lot of us, it was PHP. For other people, it was C#. For some people, it was Visual Basic. And that is the high that I feel like I have been chasing ever since I got into programming, because I was so highly productive with it. And that's the thing that I think about when I'm working on Remix, is how can I make this feel incredibly lightweight, incredibly distraction-free, and just highly productive. And that's really what we're going for. So I'm glad you feel that way. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that really is.
That's such a good place to end, but I don't want to. So I'm going to say want to dive into one other thing. And that is, I just want to give people an idea of what the Remix API really is. Because one of the things that really attracts me to Remix is how little of an API there really is. There's not really a whole lot of API there. And I think the biggest thing that people interact with the most with Remix is the module API. So like each individual route, it's in some ways it's similar to Next, where you have your routes are file based, and of course they can be dynamic with the Remix config as well. But can you talk a little bit about the route module API that people are going to be interacting with most with Remix?
Yeah, 100%. So we have these things called route modules. If you've built a React router app, typically a route, is associated with a React component. When the URL looks like this, go and render this component, right? That's basic React router stuff. And what we've done in Remix is as I said, we've kind of taken that to the next level. So now instead of just a component that's associated with your route, and a lot of this stuff is going to make it back into React router too. I don't want to, it's not all going to stay here. Remix is absolutely going to make React Router a better product. But what you've got now is you've got these other things too that you can associate with a route. So we've talked about, associating data with a route, or associating styles with a route. We've also got, the ability to associate HTTP headers with a route. So in the HTTP request, you're going to, get back some headers, both in the document request and then also in the data request. You're going to get back some headers. You can associate some arbitrary data with a route if you want to, construct like a breadcrumb or something like that from the routes that are currently on the page. So the way that we designed this API, we're basically just using the ES module API. So in a route file, everything that is part of that route is a named export from that file. The component is the default export, but everything else is a named export from that file. And the cool thing that we can do with that is that it allows us to just kind of like dice up that file however we need to, right? So this is one of the cool parts of Remix that we haven't even talked about yet. But we're really doing some cool innovation in the space of deployment as well. So you can actually deploy Remix to a number of providers already. They're all based on Node up to this point, but I'm working feverishly on a version that'll run on Cloudflare Workers. But the idea is, take this route module and run it on a Node server. Okay, now take the exact same code and go and run it in the browser when this route is rendered. When that route is visited, so you can do client. Yeah, exactly. When it's hydrated, so you can go do client side rendering and routing if you want to, or you could just have a purely, server rendered site. Or you can have some kind of hybrid, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't. And my goal actually is to make it so that. I don't know if we've actually talked about this, but my goal is, so right now you've got an entry.client.js and an entry.server.js. And my goal is, if you remove one of those files, we'll automatically know what to do, right? So if all you have is an entry.client.js, we'll assume, okay, you're just creating like a create React app client side thing, and it's purely client side app. Okay, you don't have that. All you have is an entry.server.js. Okay, well then it's purely a server rendered app. Oh, you have both of them? Well, then we're actually going to do both of them, and we're actually going to do the hydrate or something. But it's just future sort of thinking. But
fun stuff.
But anyway, yeah, the route API, getting back to that, the route API is built so that it can run in either of those places. And we can just sort of grab the exports that we need to run in any given environment and say, okay, we'll run this one here and we'll run those over there. And so it's that's kind of how it's shaken out. And it actually works really, really well with JavaScript build tools that understand ES modules, which of course they all do now. We have these like flexible objects where you're just describing like, here's all the stuff that's associated with this route.
Yeah. Well, and being able to say, here are the link tags that I want in there, it makes it easy for like the meta tags. I can update my title. Right, I don't need to have React Helmet in there or anything. Right. And you mentioned entry.server and entry.client. Like I'm the one responsible for hydrating. I'm the one who calls React DOM.hydrate. I'm the one who calls React render to string.
Right.
And so it just gives me an enormous amount of flexibility. And you don't have to create some API or convention for me to be able to override those things. I'm the one rendering the HTML tag, like all the way up to the top. And that amount of flexibility gives me, just makes me really happy about the lack of API that Remix does have. That's just less things for me to learn about. I don't need to ask you questions about how do I do these things because, well, it's staring at me in the face.
Somebody asked me the other day, they're like, do you support streaming? And I'm like, there's nothing for us to do to support streaming because you own your entry point. You are literally the one who calls React DOM render to string. So if you want, call render to node stream. And now you support streaming, like we didn't have to support that at all. Like we just gave you access to your entry point and now you're streaming your response instead of buffering it. So
yeah, it's amazing. I just think that's awesome. So we're well over time, but I did want to talk about an elephant in the room that some people are concerned about. Every time I talk about Remix, somebody makes a comment like this about the funding aspect. And so if you could take a minute or two to talk about how Remix is funded and
100%. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. So, if you're paying attention right now in open source software, we do have a bit of a problem, and it's been a problem for years now. There's so many tools that that have struggled to get the kind of funding that they needed. Some have turned to, foundations like Apache or the JS Foundation to get the funding that they need. Some have turned to, academic institutions or benevolent corporations who have been willing to grant them the funding that they need, or maybe they'll hire the people who work on the open source and now the open source has the funding that it needs. Maybe you're just, straight up relying on donations, having an open collect or something. It's a big problem right now. And so, I think, and it's been a problem for a while. So the approach that we're taking to fund the open source work that we do, and make no mistake, if you're listening to this, a lot of the work that we're doing is open source work, and it is to make a better React router for everybody. But we do need a way to figure out how to fund it and to make it sustainable. Otherwise, we just like it
You have
just
to go get a job.
it'll stagnate, and I can't work on it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we do that? So for the last couple of years, the answer for Ryan and I was, well, we'll run a training business. We'll go train people on React, and then we can work on the open source too. And like I said, the COVID kind of took a chunk out of the training business and made that a harder way to earn a living for us, at least with in-person trainings. And there's also this thing that, we know that React Router is so much more capable than it currently is, and we really want to take it to the next level. And so that's where Remix comes in. The clearest path towards funding anything is to create something of value and to ask people to pay for it. And if it works and people show up and they pay for it, then your incentives are aligned.
Yes.
And I really think funding is all about aligning incentives, right?
Yes.
Somebody comes along, they say, I value what you are doing, therefore I'm going to pay you to work on it. And I say, thank you. I'm going to take that and I'm going to use it. And now I can keep working on it full time. And now we are aligned, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can't rely on, somebody's sort of goodwill to say, oh, hey, I think Michael needs some extra money to go and work on React Router. I'm going to go kick him a donation on OpenCollect. Like, that's nice. And thank you for doing that. But that is not a sustainable way to sustain open source. And we've seen it with, just recently the Babel project, which is a project that literally anybody who is doing anything with the web these days, anybody, like all of the Fortune 500, not just a significant percentage of them, 100%, no doubt, are taking advantage of that project specifically. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, countless other businesses, right? Medium, small businesses, whatever. And they're struggling to fund the project. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame, and it's happened time and time again. It happened with OpenSSL and it's not right. And so what we're doing is we're aligning incentives between us and between people who value what we're doing. And so far it's working out incredibly well. We've had a great response from people who, they want supported, good quality tools, and they want a team that's dedicated to working on those tools full time. If you're going to build your business on Remix, you're paying for it, that's actually, you're actually going to feel great about that, because
I do.
Actually, because you're helping support the team that's doing it, right? So, I mean, I feel good about that. I always, if something is free, I'm always like, well, how's it funded? How are, because it's going to take somebody to work on this, So that's our model. Our model is that we are going to, we're selling Remix. Of course, we have a trial period. So, we have a period where you can go ahead and buy it. You can test it out. If you don't like it for whatever reason, we won't ask you any questions. You can get all your money back. No harm, no foul. But we think that it's going to provide you significant amount of value that you're going to want to stick around and you're going to want to hang around for a little while and use it with us. So we'd love to have you. I think, did you want to get into the homework?
Yeah. So I just wanted to say one quick thing on this, and that is,
sure.
When I become a user of open source software, I become a drag on that maintainer, right? I am a something that makes it harder for the maintainer, right? I'm sucking energy from the maintainer. But when I become
you're asking a question on GitHub, you're opening an issue or something, right? And they have to respond to you, right?
Exactly. So, yep. Exactly. Yeah. And so when I become a user of Remix, or a paying customer, I'm actually making that project better. And that's our incentives are aligned. I want a better product, and I give you money so you can make it better. And so I, as a user of Remix, just love this payment structure. I paid way more for the laptop that I'm using I feel like it makes a lot of sense to pay for the tools that I use. So
Awesome.
yes, we let's wrap this up. We're way
Cool.
over time. This was
Cool.
a
Cool.
great chat. So um, for our homework today, we just want you to go through the Remix tutorial. So you go to remix.run, go to the tutorial, and go through that. Try it out. Get that free trial license if you don't already have a Remix license. Give it a shot, and I think that you're really going to find that Remix is just a really special piece of software. So anything to add to that, Michael?
No, that's it. You said it perfectly. Thanks again so much for having me on the podcast. I enjoyed our chat very much, and I enjoy seeing everybody in the Remix Discord channel.
All right. Hey, thanks, Michael. See y'all later.
See ya.